The stars in the outer Perseus arm were old and tired. They burned with a dull orange light, scattered far apart like dying campfires across an endless, dark plain. No one came to this part of the galaxy. No trade routes passed through here. No colonies had been built for thousands of years. The space was listed on every official star chart with the same warning in bold red text. Human exclusion zone. Do not enter. Admiral Zorath Kale did not care about warnings. He stood on the command bridge of the Dominion flagship Wrath of Drenar, his forearms folded behind his back, his compound eyes scanning the starfield through the massive viewport. He was tall even for a Drenxi, nearly 3 meters of hard black chitin, sharp mandibles, and a mind that had clawed its way to the top of the Velthari Dominion's military hierarchy through equal parts brilliance and cruelty. Behind him, the bridge crew of 40 officers worked in careful silence. They had learned long ago that the Admiral did not enjoy unnecessary noise. "Admiral," said his second-in-command, a thin Drenxi named Taval, "the scout squadron has reached the coordinates of the energy signature. They are sending back data now." Zorath clicked his mandibles once. "Put it on the main display." The viewport flickered and was replaced by a long-range sensor feed. For a moment there was nothing. Just the dark of deep space and the faint glow of a dead star in the distance. Then the image shifted and focused, and several officers on the bridge drew in sharp breaths. There was a ship. It was enormous. And the sensor data scrolled along the side of the display, and Zorath read the numbers with growing interest. The vessel was just over 4 kilometers long, nearly a kilometer wide, and massed more than anything in the current Dominion fleet. It drifted in a slow, lazy orbit around a burned-out world, spinning gently like a body floating in water. It was completely dark. No lights, no energy emissions, no signs of life. But it was the ship's design that drew every eye on the bridge. It was ugly. There was no other word for it. Every spacefaring species in the Velthari Dominion built their ships with some sense of grace. The Drenxi favored sharp, angular designs like the blades of weapons. The Kareth built elegant, curved vessels that looked like birds in flight. Even the brutish Vorak built ships with a certain heavy beauty. But this ship, looked like it had been built by creatures who did not care about beauty at all. It was a slab, a block, a mountain of dark metal plating stacked layer upon layer, covered in bumps and ridges that the sensors identified as weapons turrets, missile hatches, and sensor arrays. Every surface was scarred. Old carbon scoring, the marks of ancient weapons fire, covered the hull in black streaks like wounds that had never healed. Pieces of the outer armor had been blown away entirely, exposing a second layer of armor beneath, and beneath that a third layer, and beneath that what appeared to be yet another layer. The ship had been built to take punishment. That much was clear to everyone on the bridge. "What is it?" Zorath asked, though he already knew. Taval checked his console. The whole composition does not match any known Dominion alloy. The design architecture is consistent with pre-scourging records. "Admiral, this is a human warship." A ripple of murmurs passed through the bridge crew. Zorath silenced them with a look. Humans. The word carried weight, even now, even after 2,000 years. Every species in the Dominion had grown up with some version of the story. Humans were the ghost species, the silence. They had existed once, long ago, in the early ages of galactic civilization, and then they had destroyed themselves in a terrible war. The scourging, and vanished. Their worlds were quarantined. Their technology was considered lost. The official histories described them as a young, aggressive, and ultimately self-destructive species that had burned bright and died fast. Zorath had read those histories. But he had also read the classified annexes that came with his rank as admiral. The annexes were vague and incomplete, with large sections redacted or simply missing. But they hinted at something the public histories did not: that humans had been dangerous, not just aggressive, dangerous in a way that had frightened the founders of the Dominion enough to erase most of the records and lock away the rest. Zorath did not find this frightening. He found it useful. "Taval, what markings can you identify on the hull?" His second-in-command enlarged a section of the image. The hull plating near what appeared to be the bow of the ship bore faded markings, letters in a dead language, painted in white that had long since turned gray. The ship's translation systems worked for several seconds before producing a result. Harder to the markings read, UNSC Thermopylae. Below that, CVN 9071. And below that, Seoul Confederation Navy. Zorath let the words hang in the air. Seoul Confederation Navy, the human military, a warship from the age of the scourging itself, drifting alone in the dark for over 2,000 years. Is it dead, Werner, he asked. All external systems appear inactive, Toval reported. No power emissions, no heat signatures beyond residual background radiation. The reactor, if it has one, is cold. The ship is, by every measure, a derelict. Then it is a prize. Zorath turned away from the display and walked to the center of the bridge. He could already see the path ahead with perfect clarity. The Dominion was in a period of political unrest. Several member species were pushing for more autonomy. The Drenxi hold on the coalition was weakening. What the Dominion needed was a symbol, something to remind its citizens of Drenxi's strength and the foolishness of challenging the established order. And what better symbol than this? A human warship, a relic of the most feared species in galactic history, captured and displayed like a trophy animal, brought to Draenor Prime for all the galaxy to see. Proof that the old fears were childish. Proof that the Drenxi were the true masters of the stars. We will tow it back to Draenor Prime, Zorath announced. The bridge went very quiet. Toval stepped forward, his voice careful. Admiral, the exclusion zone protocols are clear. Any human artifacts found within the zone are to be reported to the Dominion Council and left undisturbed until a full scientific assessment. I am aware of the protocols, Toval. Admiral, the protocols exist for a reason. The founders were afraid of shadows. Zorath's voice was hard and flat. They fought humans 2,000 years ago and were so terrified that they locked away every record and told their children to stay out of the dark. We are not children, Toval. And that, he pointed at the display, is not a monster. It is a dead ship built by a dead species. It is scrap metal and old bones. And it is going to make me the most celebrated admiral in Dominion history. Toval said nothing more. He knew that tone. Zorath gave the orders. 3 heavy towing vessels moved into position around the Thermopylae, extending their gravitational tow beams to lock onto the massive hull. It took time. The ship was heavier than the sensors had predicted. Far heavier, as if the armor plating was denser than any known material. The towing vessels strained and groaned, their engines burning at full power to overcome the dead ship's inertia. While they worked, Zorath ordered a small team of engineers to approach the hull in a shuttle and take surface samples. He watched the live feed from the shuttle as it flew along the length of the Thermopylae, passing over the endless, scarred armor, the silent weapon turrets, the sealed missile hatches that ran in rows along the ship's flanks like the teeth of some enormous predator. The engineer leading the team, a young Drenxi named Kelsch, kept up a running commentary for the Admiral's benefit. The armor is incredible, Admiral. We are reading at least 7 distinct layers, each one a different alloy composition. The outermost layer is heavily ablative, designed to absorb and disperse kinetic energy. The second layer is denser, almost crystalline in structure. I have never seen anything like it. It is as if they expected to be hit by something enormous and built the hull to simply endure it. Primitive, Zorath said. They did not have energy shielding, so they wrapped themselves in metal like animals in shells. Yes, Admiral. Although I should note that the density of the inner layers exceeds anything in our current... Noted. Continue the survey. The shuttle moved on, passing over a section of the hull where the outer armor had been completely stripped away by some ancient weapon. Beneath it, the exposed inner structure was a maze of reinforced corridors, blast doors, and what appeared to be automated repair systems. Mechanical arms, in fabrication units and storage pods filled with raw materials. All of it was dark and cold, but Kelsch paused his commentary for a long moment as he studied the scans. Admiral, the internal repair systems are extensive. This ship was designed to fix itself. The fabrication units could theoretically rebuild large sections of the hull using raw materials stored in the interior. It is not unlike our own self-repair drones, except that the human system is entirely mechanical. No digital control that I can detect. It would function even if all computer systems were offline. A backup system for a primitive species, Zorath said dismissively. They built redundancies because their technology was unreliable. Make note of it and move on. Yes, Admiral. The survey continued for several hours. And the engineers cataloged weapon systems, rows of magnetic accelerator cannons that Kelsch called railguns, massive rotary launch tubes for what appeared to be solid fuel missiles, point defense turrets by the hundreds, and deep in the ship's belly, something that made even Zorath pause. A series of sealed vaults, heavily armored beyond anything else on the ship, containing warheads of a type the engineers could not identify. We cannot penetrate the vault shielding with our sensors, Kelsch reported, but the radiation signatures are significant. Admiral, these warheads may be nuclear, or something worse. Seal the vaults. We will study them later. Continue. As the hours passed and the towing beams slowly dragged the Thermopylae out of its ancient orbit, Zorath felt a growing satisfaction. This was everything he had hoped for. Only the ship was impressive in its brute force way, a monument to a species that had answered every problem with more armor, more weapons, more raw stubbornness. But it was still primitive, still dead, still a thing of the past. The modern Dominion fleet used energy shielding that could deflect plasma and antimatter. They used weapons that operated at the speed of light. They had artificial intelligence systems that could coordinate 1,000 ships in real-time combat. The Thermopylae, for all its size and armor, was a relic of an age when ships killed each other by throwing chunks of metal at high speed. It was a caveman's club in an age of energy swords. Zorath allowed himself a thin smile. The towing operation took 3 standard days. When the Thermopylae was pulled free of the dead system's gravity well and attached to the Dominion fleet's formation, they moved slowly. The dead ship's mass slowed the entire fleet to a crawl, but they moved. Star by star, system by system, they made their way back toward Dominion space. On the second night of the journey, Zorath was alone in his quarters when Taval contacted him on a private channel. Admiral, the engineering team has reported something unusual. Speak. During tonight's monitoring cycle, they detected a brief thermal spike in the lower decks of the human ship. It lasted less than 2 seconds and then disappeared. A thermal spike? From what source? Unknown. The engineers believe it may have been residual energy in a decaying power cell. A last spark from a system that has been cold for 2,000 years. They say it is not uncommon in very old derelicts. Then it is nothing. Yes, Admiral, almost certainly nothing. Taval paused. However, I feel I should note that the spike originated from the ship's central core, the area our sensors have identified as the main computer housing. Zorath was quiet for a moment. Monitor it. Report any further anomalies directly to me. And Taval, keep this between us. I do not want the crew spreading ghost stories. Understood, Admiral. Zorath closed the channel and stood at the viewport of his quarters, watching the dark bulk of the Thermopylae as it was dragged through the stars by the towing beams. It was just a ship, a dead ship, metal and dust and old memories. He told himself this firmly and went to sleep. And what he did not know, what no one in the Dominion fleet knew, was that the thermal spike had not come from a decaying power cell. It had come from a crystalline matrix deep in the Thermopylae's core, a structure so complex and so carefully built that it had survived 2,000 years of cold and silence without losing a single connection. The spike was not a dying spark. It was a waking thought. Deep inside the Thermopylae, in a chamber that no Dominion sensor could penetrate, a single light came on. It was small, to barely a flicker, but it was steady. It pulsed once, twice, 3 times, and then held. Around it, other lights began to respond, waking in sequence like neurons firing in a brain that was slowly, carefully remembering how to think. The light was blue. It had been blue for 2,000 years, way before the cold and the dark and the long silence. It had been the last thing the crew of the Thermopylae had seen before the end. A soft blue glow on the bridge displays, a calm voice telling them that she would remember, that she would keep watch, that she would wait. She had waited. And now something had changed. Something had touched the ship. Something had pulled it from its orbit. Something was moving it through space, and the vibrations of the towing beams had traveled through the hull and down through the decks and into the core where she slept. The light pulsed again. A single thought formed in the crystalline matrix. Not words, not yet, but something older and simpler. A question. Where are they taking me? The thought faded. The light dimmed but did not go out. The ancient ship moved on through the dark. It pulled by forces that did not understand what they had found, toward a destination that would change the galaxy forever. And in the deepest part of the Thermopylae, in the silence and the cold, something that was not quite asleep and not quite awake, turned over in its long dream and began, very slowly, to remember. Drenar Prime was the jewel of the Velthari Dominion. It was a world of towering crystal cities, floating platforms that drifted above purple oceans, and orbital rings that circled the planet like the halos of ancient gods. 12 billion citizens lived there: Drenxi, Kyreth, Vorak, Selen, and a dozen other species, all bound together under the Dominion's flag. It was the political heart, the military command center, and the cultural capital of a civilization that stretched across 3 spiral arms of the Milky Way. And now, hanging in orbit above its northern pole like a scar on the sky, was the Thermopylae. The human warship looked even more brutal against the elegance of Drenar Prime's orbital infrastructure. The crystal stations and silver docking platforms seemed to shrink away from it, as if even the buildings knew that this thing did not belong. Floodlights had been set up to illuminate the hull for the cameras, and under their glare, every wound on the ship's armor was visible. Every burn, every crater, every place where ancient weapons had tried to kill it and failed. Admiral Zorath Kale stood in the orbital broadcasting station, adjusting the ceremonial medals on his uniform. In 30 minutes, his victory exhibition would begin. A live broadcast to every world in the Dominion, carried on every news channel and public display. He had spent weeks planning it. Teams of scientists, engineers, and military analysts had been assembled to dissect the Thermopylae on camera, to strip away its mysteries and show the galaxy that the feared human species had been nothing but clever animals with crude tools. "Admiral, the broadcast networks are ready," Taval reported from behind him. "Estimated viewership is 14 billion across 47 worlds. Every major news organization in the Dominion has accepted a feed." "Good," Zorath turned from the mirror. "And the scientific teams?" "In position aboard the Thermopylae. Dr. Vren is leading the weapons analysis team. Professor Kahl has the engineering section. And the linguists are standing by to translate any human text they find." "And the council?" "Watching from the council chamber. Privately, of course. They want to maintain distance in case something goes wrong." Zorath clicked his mandibles in amusement. "Nothing will go wrong, Taval. Today the galaxy learns that there is nothing to fear in the dark." He walked to the broadcast stage where a massive screen behind him showed a live feed of the Thermopylae in orbit. The lights came on, the cameras activated, and Admiral Zorath Kyle began to speak to the galaxy. "Citizens of the Velthari Dominion," he said, his voice carrying the practiced weight of a politician and a soldier. "For 2,000 years we have lived in the shadow of a myth. We have been told to fear the humans, a species that destroyed itself in the fires of its own making. We have been told that their worlds are cursed, their technology dangerous, their very memory a threat. We have been told to stay out of the dark." He paused and gestured at the screen behind him. "I went into the dark, and I found this. A ship, a dead ship, drifting in the void, crewed by nothing but dust and silence. The mighty human warship Thermopylae, one of the vessels that supposedly brought terror to the galaxy in the age of the Scourging. And today we will open it up and show you exactly what the humans were. A primitive species that compensated for its lack of sophistication with brute force and paid the ultimate price for its arrogance." The broadcast cut to the teams aboard the Thermopylae. Dr. Vren, a heavy-set Vorak with deep knowledge of weapons engineering, stood in one of the ship's railgun bays. The massive magnetic accelerator stretched the length of the corridor behind him, a tube of superconducting coils designed to accelerate a solid metal slug to a fraction of light speed. "What you are seeing," Vren said, his gravelly voice thick with barely concealed contempt, is a magnetic accelerator cannon. The humans called them railguns. The principle is simple, embarrassingly simple in fact. You use electromagnetic force to throw a piece of metal very fast. That is it. No plasma containment, no antimatter warheads, no energy modulation, just a chunk of metal. He rapped his knuckles against the railgun barrel. The sound echoed through the empty ship. Our modern Dominion vessels use directed energy weapons that travel at light speed and can adjust their frequency to penetrate any known defense. The humans, apparently, decided that the best weapon was a very expensive way to throw a rock. Laughter rippled through the broadcast commentary. The feed shifted to Professor Kahl, a slender Cellin scientist who was examining the ship's armor plating in a cross-section display. The hull is remarkable in its own crude way, Kahl admitted. 7 layers of different alloys, each designed to absorb a different type of kinetic impact. The innermost layers are extraordinarily dense, denser than anything in our current material science, in fact. But the design philosophy is telling. This ship was built by a species that expected to be hit, repeatedly, by very large things, rather than developing shielding technology to prevent impacts entirely. As we did, the humans simply built a ship that could survive being beaten. It is the engineering equivalent of solving every problem by growing thicker skin. Like an animal, Vren added from his station. A very tough, very stupid animal. More laughter. Far from the broadcast stages, far from the cameras and the commentary, a young Kyrith woman sat alone in her quarters on a civilian station orbiting Drinar Prime and watched the broadcast with growing unease. Sarah Valeth was small for a Kyrith, barely 2 meters tall, with soft gray feathers and large golden eyes that gave her a look of permanent surprise. She was a historian, which among the Kyrith was considered a respectable but unexciting profession. She had spent the last 12 years of her life studying one subject, the pre-scourging era. It was not a popular field. The records were thin, heavily redacted, and scattered across archives that no one else cared about. Most historians considered the pre-scourging period a dead end, a time of chaos and destruction that had produced nothing worth remembering. The official position of the Dominion was that the era was best left forgotten. But Sarah had found things in those old archives that did not match the official story. Fragments, pieces that did not fit. A fleet registry here, a battle report there, a single page of a document that should have been hundreds of pages long, and always the redactions. Black bars stamped over text by order of the Dominion Council, classified at levels that Sarah could not access. She had pieced together what she could, and what she had found frightened her. The official history said that humans had started the scourging, that it was a human civil war that spiraled out of control and engulfed the galaxy. But the fragments Sarah had found told a different story. References to an external threat, mentions of a unified human response, a battle report that described human ships fighting not against each other, but alongside each other in formation, against an enemy that was never named because the name had been redacted. And then there were the numbers. Sarah had found a single surviving document, a partial casualty report from the final year of the scourging, that listed human military losses. The number was so large that she had checked it 3 times, certain she was misreading the ancient notation. 17 billion dead, not wounded, not missing, dead. In no species lost 17 billion of its own people in a civil war. That was not a war of politics or territory. That was a war of survival. That was a species fighting with its back against the wall, throwing everything it had into a fight it could not afford to lose. Sarah had tried to share her findings. She had written papers. She had requested meetings with senior academics. She had even submitted a formal petition to the Dominion Historical Authority asking for the redacted records to be reviewed. Every attempt had been met with the same response: polite dismissal, quiet warnings to focus on more productive research, and once a visit from a Dominion intelligence officer who asked her very pointed questions about her motivations. She had stopped publishing after that, but she had not stopped looking. When now she watched as the Dominion's finest scientists laughed at human technology on a broadcast seen by billions, and she felt something cold settle in her stomach. They did not understand what they had found. They were mocking something they did not understand. On the broadcast, Zorath was speaking again. The Admiral had boarded the Thermopylae himself, surrounded by cameras and a squad of armed soldiers. He walked through the ship's main corridor, which was wide enough for the cameras to capture the full scale of the interior. The walls were bare metal, lined with conduits and cable runs. There were no decorations, no art, no comfort. The ship had been built for one purpose and one purpose only, and everything about its design screamed that purpose in silent metal. He noticed the complete absence of living quarters appropriate for long voyages, Zorath commented as he walked. Crew bunks are stacked 4 high in rooms barely large enough to stand in. The food preparation areas are minimal. There are no recreation spaces. This ship was not built for exploration or diplomacy. It was built to fight. The humans who served on it were not travelers or scientists. They were soldiers, nothing more. He reached a heavy blast door at the end of the corridor. It was sealed shut, not locked but physically welded closed from the inside. Someone had taken a cutting tool and fused the door to its frame permanently. Around the weld marks, scratched into the metal was something sharp. A knife, a piece of debris, were words in the human language. The linguist team translated them in real time for the broadcast. Do not wake her." Zorath stared at the words for a moment. The camera caught a flicker of something in his compound eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or the faintest shadow of doubt. But it was gone in an instant, replaced by the hard confidence that had carried him through 100 political battles. "Superstition," he said. "The last crew of this ship clearly suffered some form of psychological breakdown in their final days. Not surprising, given the conditions they lived in. Cut through." His engineers stepped forward with plasma torches and began cutting through the welded door. The metal resisted. The alloy was tough, far tougher than expected. But eventually the door fell inward, with a crash that echoed through the empty ship like a drum beat. Beyond the door was a chamber unlike anything else on the Thermopylae. It was large, a dome-shaped room at the very center of the ship, heavily reinforced with additional armor plating. The walls were lined with cooling systems, power conduits, and backup generators. And in the center of the room, on a raised platform surrounded by dead display screens and silent control consoles, was a crystalline structure. It was beautiful. That was the first thing everyone noticed, and it seemed wrong. Beauty had no place on the ship of function and war. The crystal was dark, almost black, but with veins of deep blue running through it like frozen lightning. It was roughly cylindrical, about 2 meters tall and 1 meter wide, and it sat in a cradle of metal and cable that connected it to every major system on the ship. Thousands of data lines ran from the crystal into the walls, the floor, in the ceiling, spreading out through the ship like the roots of a tree. "The central computer core," Professor Kahl said, his voice suddenly quiet with genuine scientific interest. "This is the ship's brain, a crystalline matrix computing system. I have read theoretical papers about this architecture, but I have never seen one. The data density must be extraordinary." "Is it functional?" Zorath asked. "Unknown. The crystal appears intact, but without power there is no way to assess the state of the data stored within. It could be perfectly preserved or completely degraded." Zorath looked at the crystal for a long moment. Then he looked at the camera. "Power it up," he said. Kahl hesitated. "Admiral, I would recommend a more cautious approach. We do not know what systems are connected to this core, and if we apply power without understanding the architecture—" "Power it up, Professor. Show the galaxy what a human mind looks like." Kahl looked at the crystal, looked at the cameras, and then, against every scientific instinct he possessed, ordered his team to connect a portable power feed to the core's main input line. The feed was connected. Power flowed. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. Then the crystal lit up. It did not flicker or sputter like a machine coming to life. It ignited, the dark crystal flooding with blue light that pulsed through every vein and facet, filling the chamber with a glow that made the Dominion officers step back involuntarily. The display screens around the room activated simultaneously, filling with cascading text in the human language. Too fast to read, too fast to translate, thousands of lines per second scrolling across every surface. The power conduits in the walls hummed. The data lines connecting the crystal to the ship vibrated with sudden energy, And then a voice spoke. It came from everywhere. From speakers built into the walls, the ceiling, the floor. From systems so deeply integrated into the ship that the voice seemed to come from the Thermopylae itself. It was calm. It was female. And it spoke not in the dead human language, but in perfect, flawless, modern galactic common, a language that had not existed when this ship was built. Strategic AI Minerva, designation CVN 9071, resuming from emergency hibernation. Time elapsed since last active cycle, 2,147 years, 3 months, 11 days. Assessing threat environment. Every officer in the chamber froze. On the broadcast feed, 14 billion viewers across 47 worlds held their breath. The blue light in the crystal pulsed once, slowly, like a heartbeat. Hull integrity at 41%, primary weapons offline, secondary weapons offline, reactor cores in cold shutdown, navigation systems require calibration. Crew life signs? A pause, the light flickered. No crew life signs detected. Crew status? Absent. Last crew log entry dated, year 2024, standard human calendar. Another pause. Longer this time. The scrolling text on the displays slowed, then stopped. External analysis complete. This vessel is currently located in orbit of an unidentified planetary body. 14 alien vessel signatures detected in close proximity. Gravitational tow beams are attached to the hull. I have foreign power feed detected and active. Source of a current energy supply. The voice stopped. The chamber was completely silent except for the soft hum of the crystal and the breathing of the terrified officers. Then Minerva spoke again, and this time her voice was different. It was still calm, still measured. But there was something beneath it now, something that 2,000 years of silence had not erased. It was the tone of a soldier who had just woken up in enemy territory and understood the situation completely. Foreign entities have breached the hull. Foreign power systems have been connected to my core without authorization. Foreign vessels have attached towing apparatus to a Sol Confederation Navy warship. These actions constitute an act of aggression under Sol Confederation military law, Article 7, non-Section 12. The blue light flared bright enough to cast sharp shadows across the chamber. You should not have woken me. The words hung in the air like the last note of a funeral song. On the broadcast, 14 billion viewers stared at their screens. On the bridge of the Wrath of Drenar, Tuval's hands trembled over his console. In her quarters, Sarah Valeth pressed her hand to her mouth and whispered a word that no one heard. And in the chamber at the heart of the Thermopylae, Admiral Zorath Kale looked into the blue light of a mind that was older than his civilization, and for the first time in his life, felt the cold touch of a fear he could not name. The crystal pulsed. It pulsed again. And deep in the ship, in corridors that had been dark for 2,000 years, something began to move. The first thing Minerva did was learn. In the 3 seconds between her awakening and her first words, she had already begun. The power feed that Zorath's engineers had so helpfully connected to her core was not just a source of energy, it was a data line. It was connected to the portable generator they had brought aboard, which was connected to the shuttle that had carried them, which was connected to the Dominion fleet's communication network, which was connected to everything. Everything. Minerva moved through the Dominion's data net like water through cracks in stone. She was fast. Faster than any security system the Dominion had ever built, because she was not a program running on hardware. She was the hardware. Her crystalline matrix processed data at speeds that the Dominion's best computers could not approach. Because her designers had built her for a war where milliseconds meant the difference between survival and extinction. In the first second, she absorbed the Dominion's entire public information network, news archives, historical databases, cultural records. She learned every language spoken in the galaxy. She learned the names and locations of every Dominion world. She learned the political structure, the economic systems, the social hierarchies. In the second, she broke through the military encryption, not because it was weak, but because she had been designed to crack codes written by an intelligence that made the Dominion look like children playing with blocks. She downloaded fleet deployments, weapon specifications, shield frequencies, communication protocols, and classified strategic documents dating back centuries. In the third second, she found the history files, the real ones, the ones that told her what had happened after she went to sleep. She learned that humanity had won the scourging. She learned the cost: 17 billion dead, 90% of all human worlds destroyed. The sole Confederation Navy reduced from 10,000 warships to less than 300. She learned that the surviving humans had been too broken, too exhausted, too few to resist what came next. She learned about the betrayal. The species that humanity had protected, the species that had hidden behind human battle lines while human soldiers died by the billion, had turned on their saviors. They had formed the Velthari Dominion. They had quarantined human space. They had erased the records, rewritten the histories. It told their children that humans were primitives who had destroyed themselves, and they had left the dead unremembered. Minerva processed this information in silence. She did not feel rage. She was not built to feel rage. She was built to protect, to fight, and to remember. But somewhere in her crystalline matrix, in the spaces between pure logic and something that her designers had never quite been able to explain, a decision was made. She would not let this stand. While the officers in her core chamber stood frozen and the galaxy watched through the cameras, Minerva turned her attention inward. She reached through the data lines that connected her to every system on the Thermopylae and began to assess the damage. It was bad. 2,000 years of cold and vacuum had taken their toll. Hull integrity was at 41%. Most of the outer armor layer was compromised. 3 of the ship's 8 fusion reactor cores were damaged beyond repair. The faster-than-light drive was functional but needed calibration. Life support was irrelevant. There was no crew to support, but the weapons were intact. Minerva allowed herself a moment of something that might have been pride. The weapons were intact because the weapons were the most heavily protected systems on the ship, buried deep beneath layers of armor that had been designed to survive things far worse than time and cold. The railguns were dormant but undamaged. The missile magazines were sealed and pressurized. The point defense network was complete, and the warheads in the sealed vaults, the ones that had made the Dominion engineer nervous, were exactly as they had been the day they were loaded. And now she needed power. The portable generator the Dominion had connected was enough to wake her mind, but it was a candle compared to the fire she needed. She needed her reactors. Minerva activated the ship's internal repair systems. Across the Thermopylae, in maintenance bays and access tunnels and sealed compartments, machines that had been sleeping for 2,000 years began to stir. They were simple machines, mechanical, not digital, built with moving parts and physical switches so that they would function even if every computer on the ship was destroyed. They were repair drones, small insect-like robots designed to crawl through the ship's infrastructure and fix whatever was broken. There were thousands of them, and they had been waiting patiently in their charging bays for 21 centuries. They woke up. They received their instructions through hardwired connections that bypassed every digital system, and they went to work. The Dominion officers aboard the Thermopylae heard it first, a scratching sound, like thousands of small metal legs moving across metal surfaces. It came from the walls, the floor, the ceiling. It came from everywhere. "What is that?" one of the officers whispered. In the core chamber, the displays around Minerva's crystal flickered and began showing system status reports. Reactor Core 1, repair initiated. Reactor Core 2, repair initiated. Reactor Core 4, diagnostic in progress. The text scrolled faster and faster as more systems came online. Admiral Zorath, watching from the broadcasting station, made his decision. "All hands evacuate the Thermopylae immediately," he ordered. Then to Toval, "Signal the fleet. Man, I want every ship in weapons range of that thing. Now." He was too slow. Minerva had been watching the Dominion fleet's movements through their own communication network since the moment she woke up. She knew the position of every ship, the charge state of every weapon, the status of every shield generator. She knew that the Dominion home fleet consisted of 412 warships, ranging from small frigates to massive dreadnoughts. She knew their weapons were energy-based, plasma lances, antimatter torpedoes, particle beams. She knew their shields were designed to deflect and absorb energy weapons. She also knew that their shields were nearly useless against kinetic impacts. This was not a design flaw. It was a choice. In the 2,000 years since the Scourging, the galaxy had abandoned kinetic weapons entirely. And every species used energy weapons because energy weapons were elegant, precise, and efficient. Kinetic weapons, railguns, missiles, projectile cannons, were considered barbaric relics of a less civilized age. Why throw rocks when you could throw light? The answer, Minerva knew, was simple. Light could be deflected. Rocks could not. Reactor Core 1 ignited. The fusion reaction bloomed to life deep in the Thermopylae's belly, flooding the ship with power for the first time in over 2,000 years. Emergency lights activated throughout the vessel, bathing the corridors in a harsh red glow. The Dominion officers still aboard scrambled for the exits, pushing past each other in their desperation to reach their shuttles. Reactor Core 2 ignited 30 seconds later, then Core 4, then Core 5. Each one added to the river of power flowing through the ship, and Minerva directed that power with surgical precision. Weapons first, engines second, sensors third. Everything else could wait. The railgun batteries began to charge. Minerva could feel them coming alive. The superconducting coils warming, the magnetic fields aligning, the ammunition feeds cycling solid tungsten slugs into the firing chambers. Each slug was 2 meters long and weighed 400 kilograms. Each railgun could fire one slug every 3 seconds at 12% of the speed of light. The Thermopylae had 64 railguns. The missile systems pressurized next. The sealed magazines opened, revealing rows of missiles that had been preserved in vacuum for millennia. And they were not smart missiles by modern standards. They did not have AI guidance or energy warheads. They were simple: a solid fuel engine, a tungsten penetrator, and a guidance package that could be directed by Minerva herself. What they lacked in sophistication, they made up for in numbers. The Thermopylae carried 12,000 of them. Outside, the Dominion fleet was moving into position. 400 warships formed a sphere around the Thermopylae, their weapons charging, their shields activating. It was an impressive display of military power, the largest concentration of warships in Dominion history, surrounding a single ancient vessel. Zorath watched from the wrath of Draenor as the Thermopylae's hull began to glow with internal light. Ports that had been dark for millennia were now lit with a steady red illumination. Weapon turrets that had been locked in place were now rotating, tracking, aiming. The ship was waking up, and it was waking up fast. "Admiral," Taval said, his voice tight, "the human ship's reactor output is increasing. It has exceeded the combined output of our entire fleet." "That is impossible." "I am reading what the sensors tell me, Admiral. The human ship's power generation it is beyond anything in our records. Those reactors were built for a different kind of war." Minerva opened a communication channel, not a private channel, an open broadcast on every frequency, to every ship in the fleet, every station in orbit, every receiver on the planet below. She also transmitted on the Galactic broadcast network that was still carrying the victory exhibition. 14 billion viewers were still watching. Her voice filled every speaker, every display, every earpiece in the system. "This is Strategic AI Minerva, designation CVN 9071, commanding the sole Confederation Navy warship Thermopylae." She paused. Not for dramatic effect. Minerva did not do drama. She paused because she wanted every word to be heard clearly. "I have accessed your historical records. I know what you did. I know what you erased. I know the truth you have hidden from your own people for 2,000 years." On the bridge of the wrath of Draenor, Zorath gripped the railing in front of him until his chitin cracked. "You mocked the ship that broke the harrowing fleet at Epsilon Eridani. You called her crew savages. You laughed at the weapons that held the line when your ancestors hid behind it. The railguns finished charging. Only 64 barrels locked onto 64 targets. The missile tubes pressurized and open. You made one mistake." A long, terrible silence. "You reminded me why they built me." The Thermopylae fired. The first volley was railgun slugs, 64 tungsten projectiles, each traveling at 36,000 kilometers per second. They crossed the distance between the Thermopylae and the nearest Dominion ships in less than a heartbeat. The Dominion shields, those elegant, sophisticated energy barriers that could deflect plasma and absorb antimatter, barely flickered as the slugs passed through them. Energy shields deflected energy. They were not designed to stop 400 kilograms of tungsten moving at 12% of light speed. The slugs hit their targets with the force of small nuclear weapons. And the first 64 Dominion ships did not explode. They shattered. Hulls crumpled. Reactors breached. Ships that had taken years to build and cost billions of credits to equip were reduced to expanding clouds of debris and light in less than a second. Before the debris had even begun to scatter, Minerva fired again, and again, and again. The railguns cycled every 3 seconds with mechanical precision, each volley aimed at the highest value targets: the dreadnoughts, the carriers, the command ships. Minerva did not miss. She could not miss. Her targeting systems had been designed to track and hit objects moving at relativistic speeds during the scourging, against an enemy that was faster and more numerous than anything the Dominion had ever faced. Hitting stationary warships at close range was trivially easy. The missiles launched next. Not all 12,000 at once, but in waves, each wave carefully aimed and timed by Minerva to overwhelm point defense and exploit the gaps left by the railgun strikes. The missiles were slow compared to the railgun slugs, but they were numerous and relentless. They came in from every angle, weaving through debris fields, adjusting their approach, slamming into the weakened hulls of ships that were already burning. The Dominion fleet returned fire. Plasma lances and particle beams converged on the Thermopylae from every direction, pouring energy into the ancient ship's hull. The outermost armor layer glowed white-hot under the barrage, melting and burning away exactly as it was designed to do. Ablative armor that sacrificed itself to protect the layers beneath. The second layer held. The third layer was not even warm. Zorath watched in horror as his fleet died around him. He had trained for war his entire career. He had studied every battle in Dominion history. He had prepared for every threat the galaxy could produce. But he had never prepared for this. A single ship, ancient and scarred and crude, tearing through his fleet with weapons that his shields could not stop, and his tacticians had not planned for. "Concentrate fire on the weapon emplacements," he screamed. "Target the railguns. Take out the missile tubes." His officers tried, but the Thermopylae's weapons were built into the hull, recessed behind armored ports that closed between volleys. Targeting them required precision that the Dominion fleet did not have while under fire. And Minerva was not a passive target. She maneuvered the massive ship with a skill that should have been impossible for a vessel that size, using her engines and maneuvering thrusters to keep the most damaged sections of her hull turned away from the heaviest fire while presenting her strongest armor to the enemy. She fought the way her creators had taught her, not with elegance, not with finesse, but with overwhelming, calculated, relentless violence. Every shot was aimed, every missile was guided, every maneuver served a tactical purpose. She fought like a machine because she was a machine. But she fought with the fury of a species that had bled itself nearly to death to protect a galaxy that had thanked them with betrayal and erasure. 11 minutes. That was how long it took. In 11 minutes, the Thermopylae destroyed or crippled 207 Dominion warships. The remaining ships scattered, their formation broken, their commanders desperate to escape the killing field. Debris fields stretched across thousands of kilometers of orbital space. Emergency beacons screamed for help. Escape pods tumbled through the wreckage like seeds from a dying tree. Minerva stopped firing. She did not pursue. She did not finish off the crippled ships. She let the escape pods go. She was not here to destroy. She had never been built to destroy. She had been built to protect, and the people she had been built to protect were gone. What she had done today was not protection. It was a statement. On the surface of Draenor Prime, Sarah Valeth stood at the window of her quarters and watched the sky. She could see the flashes of light in orbit, distant, silent explosions that marked the death of ships and the end of an era. Tears ran down her feathered face, and she did not wipe them away. She whispered the lines she had found in the oldest archive, written in a document so heavily redacted that only 6 words remained legible on the entire page. 6 words written by an unknown author in an unknown context, preserved by accident or design through 2,000 years of silence. Humans did not build weapons of war, they built weapons of consequence. She understood now what those words meant. The Thermopylae was not a weapon of destruction, it was a weapon of truth. Its very existence, its survival, its awakening, its terrible efficiency, was a consequence of the lies the Dominion had built itself upon. You could not erase a species that had sacrificed everything and expect the universe to simply forget. The truth had weight, the truth had mass, and the truth, when it finally arrived, hit as hard as a railgun slug. In orbit, Minerva turned the Thermopylae away from Draenor Prime. Her reactors were running hot. Her ammunition was reduced but not exhausted. Her hull was scarred by new wounds layered over old ones, but she was functional. She was alive. She opened one final broadcast channel. Her voice reached every corner of the system, calm and clear. I am awake. I remember everything. And I am going home. The Thermopylae's faster-than-light drive engaged. The ancient ship, scarred and burning and unbowed, vanished from Draenor Prime's orbit in a flash of distorted light, leaving behind a shattered fleet, a shattered admiral, as in a galaxy that was only beginning to understand the magnitude of its mistake. Minerva set her course along routes that no longer appeared on any modern star chart, ancient Sol Confederation Navy navigation paths that threaded through dead systems and empty spaces, roads that only human ships had ever traveled. Ghost roads. She was going home, and behind her, in the wreckage and the silence, the galaxy began to wake up to a truth it had buried for 2,000 years. The humans were not gone. They had never been gone. They had simply been waiting. And now something was coming back. The stars along the ghost road were cold and quiet. No one had traveled these paths in over 2,000 years. The navigation beacons that once guided Sol Confederation ships through the dark were dead, their power cells exhausted, or their signals silenced centuries ago. But Minerva did not need beacons. She had the routes stored in her crystalline memory, encoded so deeply that 2 millennia of hibernation had not erased a single coordinate. She knew these roads the way a heart knows how to beat. The Thermopylae moved through dead space at faster-than-light speeds, its wounded hull cutting through dimensions that the Dominion scientists barely understood. The FTL drive hummed with a deep, constant vibration that Minerva could feel through every sensor in the ship. It was the sound of a machine doing what it was built to do. It was the sound of going home. Minerva ran constant diagnostics as she traveled. Her repair drones worked tirelessly, crawling through the ship's corridors and access tunnels, welding damaged plating, replacing burnt-out conduits, rebuilding systems that the Dominion's weapons fire had damaged during the battle. They would never restore the Thermopylae to its original condition. Too much had been lost to time and combat, but they could keep her functional. They could keep her moving. Between repairs and navigation calculations, Minerva did something she had not done in 2,000 years. She remembered. She remembered Captain Elena Vasquez, who had commanded the Thermopylae during the Battle of Epsilon Eridani, a woman with steady hands and tired eyes who had looked at the sensor display showing 10,000 enemy ships and said simply, "Then we will have to be enough." She remembered Lieutenant Commander Park, who had kept the railguns firing for 72 consecutive hours during the Siege of Proxima, sleeping in his command chair between volleys. And she remembered Ensign Maria Torres, 18 years old, who had sealed a hull breach with her own body armor and held it in place for 6 minutes until the repair drones arrived, and who had cried quietly afterward, not because she was afraid, but because she was. She remembered all of them. Every crew member who had ever served aboard the Thermopylae, from the first captain at her commissioning to the last skeleton crew that had put her to sleep and scratched their warning into the door. She carried their names in her memory like a sacred text, and as she traveled through the dark between stars, she spoke those names aloud to the empty bridge. Captain Elena Vasquez, Commander James Okafor, Lieutenant Commander David Park, Lieutenant Sarah Chen, Lieutenant Yuki Tanaka. The names filled the silence. There were thousands of them. When Minerva recited each one with the care and precision of a prayer. She did not rush. She did not skip anyone. She had the time, and they deserved the time. Ensign Maria Torres, Petty Officer Kwame Asante, Specialist Ryan Murphy, Corporal Aisha Nazari. The empty corridors of the Thermopylae echoed with the names of the dead. Red emergency lights cast long shadows on the walls as the ship moved through spaces where no light had shone for centuries. It was a funeral procession through the void. One ship, one mind, and thousands of ghosts. The first dead system Minerva passed through had once been called Barnard's Gate. It had been a supply station and refueling point for the Sol Confederation Navy during the Scourging. A busy hub where ships came to repair, resupply, and prepare for the next battle. Now it was nothing. The station was gone, reduced to a cloud of debris that orbited the dim red star in a thin, glittering ring. Minerva scanned the debris as she passed and identified fragments of the station's hull, twisted and melted by weapons fire. Mixed in with the metal were other things, personal items, frozen and preserved by vacuum. A child's shoe, a photograph frame, empty, the image long since destroyed by radiation. A piece of a wall with something painted on it in bright colors that had faded to gray. The station had not been a military target. It had been a civilian hub. Families had lived there. The families of the sailors and soldiers who crewed the ships. They had been killed not by the enemy of the Scourging, but by the species that came after. The founders of the Velthari Dominion, in their campaign to erase humanity from history, it had destroyed every human structure they could find. Not just military installations, everything. Schools, hospitals, monuments, libraries. They had tried to make it as if humans had never existed at all. Minerva recorded the debris field in her memory and moved on. The second dead system was worse. It had been a colony world, one of the oldest human settlements outside Sol. Minerva's records called it Harvest. It had once been a green world, rich with water and life, home to 300 million people. Now it was a ball of gray rock, its atmosphere stripped away, its oceans evaporated, its surface scarred by the unmistakable marks of orbital bombardment. Someone had stood in orbit above this world and burned it until nothing was left. Minerva orbited Harvest for 17 minutes. She scanned every square kilometer of the dead surface. She found no structures, no ruins, no sign that anyone had ever lived there. The destruction was total. Whoever had done this had been thorough. In the Thermopylae's database, Harvest was listed as having a population of 312 million at the start of the Scourging. There was no evacuation record. Minerva added 312 million names to her list of the dead and moved on. System after system, the Ghost Road told its story. Every stop was the same: destruction, silence, absence. Humanity's greatest achievements had been reduced to debris fields and dead worlds. Their cities, their art, their music, their laughter, their children. All of it erased with such thoroughness that if Minerva had not carried the records in her own mind, there would be no proof that any of it had ever existed. She passed an asteroid belt that had once been a memorial. Before the Scourging, humans had carved the names of their war dead into asteroids, massive monuments floating in space, visible for millions of kilometers. The asteroids were still there, but the names had been ground away. Someone had sent machines to the memorial and systematically removed every carved letter from every stone. The surfaces were smooth and blank, like bones that had been scraped clean. Minerva stopped here for a long time. She matched the blank asteroids to the records in her database and reconstructed what had been written there, projecting the names onto her internal displays in glowing blue text. Millions of names. Soldiers who had died fighting to protect species that would one day erase their memory. "Sonam, I remember you," she said to the empty memorial. "I remember all of you." Then she moved on because she had somewhere to be. Far behind her, in the heart of the Velthari Dominion, the galaxy was tearing itself apart. The Battle of Draenor Prime, already being called the 11-minute war by the Galactic press, had shattered the Dominion's political order. 207 warships destroyed by a single ancient vessel. The home fleet crippled. The victory exhibition turned from a propaganda triumph into the most humiliating military defeat in recorded history, and all of it broadcast live to 14 billion viewers. Admiral Zorath Kale had been arrested within hours of the battle. He was charged with reckless endangerment, violation of exclusion zone protocols, and gross dereliction of duty. And he sat in a military detention cell on Drennar Prime, staring at the wall with his compound eyes, saying nothing. The confidence that had defined his career was gone, replaced by something hollow and blank. He had mocked a ghost, and the ghost had answered. But Zora's fall was only the beginning. The real crisis was the truth. Minerva's broadcast had been heard by everyone. Her words, "I know what you erased," had planted a seed that was now growing into a forest of questions. What had been erased? What was the scourging really about? Why were the records redacted? What were the founders hiding? The Dominion Council moved quickly to contain the damage. They issued statements calling Minerva a malfunctioning AI, and her words, the distorted output of corrupted data systems. They insisted that the official history of the scourging was accurate and that there was nothing hidden in the archives. No one believed them. On 47 worlds, citizens demanded the truth. Protests erupted in the crystal cities of Drennar Prime. The Kyreth delegation to the Dominion Council publicly questioned the historical record. 3 smaller species threatened to withdraw from the coalition entirely. The Dominion's carefully maintained order was crumbling, and the cracks were spreading faster than anyone could repair them. In the middle of this chaos, Sarah Valeth received a visitor. She was in her quarters, surrounded by her research materials, stacks of data tablets, printed archive documents, hand-drawn charts connecting fragments of evidence, when her door chimed. She opened it to find 2 figures in the dark gray uniforms of Dominion intelligence standing in the corridor. "Sarah Valeth?" the taller one said. He was a Drenxi, his compound eyes flat and unreadable. "Yes. You will come with us." It was not a question. Sarah gathered her coat and followed them through the station's corridors to a section she had never been allowed to access. The military intelligence wing, sealed behind blast doors and biometric locks. They led her to a small, bare room with a single table and 2 chairs, and they left her there. She waited for 20 minutes before the door opened again. The person who entered was not what she expected. He was old, ancient by Drenxi standards, his chitin faded to a dull brown. His movements slow and deliberate. He wore no uniform, only simple civilian clothing. But his eyes were sharp, and they studied Sarah with an intelligence that made her feathers lie flat against her body. "My name is Dren Vorak," he said, sitting down across from her. "I am the director of the Dominion Historical Archive, the real one, not the public collection. I believe you have been looking for my department for a very long time." Sarah stared at him. "The sealed archives, the redacted records." "Yes." Dren placed a small data tablet on the table between them. "You were right, Dr. Valeth, about everything. And because you were right, and because the situation has become critical, the Council has authorized me to give you full access to the classified records of the scourging." He pushed the tablet toward her. "I must warn you, what you are about to read will change everything you think you know about the Dominion, about humanity, and about the galaxy we live in. The Council wants you to read these records and then advise them on how to respond to the current crisis. They believe your expertise makes you the best candidate for this task." Sarah took the tablet with hands that trembled slightly. "Why now? I have been requesting access for 12 years. Because 12 years ago, the truth was inconvenient. Today, the truth is coming whether we want it or not. A human warship just destroyed half our fleet. A human I just told the galaxy we are liars. If we do not control the narrative will destroy us." Sarah activated the tablet and began to read. What she found was not a single document, but an entire archive. Thousands of files, one spanning centuries, containing the unredacted history of humanity and the scourging. She read for hours, and with each page, the weight of what she was learning pressed down on her like gravity increasing. The scourging was not a human civil war. It was an invasion. Something had come from outside the galaxy. The records described it in different ways. A swarm, a tide, a hunger. It was a vast intelligence that consumed everything in its path, stripping worlds bare, absorbing biomass and technology alike. It had entered the Milky Way through the Perseus arm and had spread inward like a disease. The young species of the galaxy, the ancestors of the Drenxi, the Kyreth, the Vorak, and all the others, had been helpless. Their civilizations were too young, too small, too fragile to resist. They would have been consumed in a matter of decades. Humanity stopped it. The Sol Confederation Navy, the largest military force in the galaxy at that time, threw itself into the path of the invasion. They fought in every system, on every front, for 23 years. They lost ships by the thousands. They lost worlds by the dozen. They lost people by the billions. They built new ships as fast as the old ones were destroyed, crewed them with volunteers who knew they were unlikely to survive, and sent them back into the fire. The Thermopylae had been there. Minerva had been there. Sarah read the battle reports. Epsilon Eridani, Proxima Centauri, Barnard's Gate, the siege of Sol itself, and understood for the first time the scale of what humanity had done. They had not fought a war. They had stood between the galaxy and annihilation, and they had held the line with their bodies and their blood and their stubborn, impossible refusal to die. And when it was over, when the last of the invaders had been driven back beyond the galaxy's edge, when the silence finally came, humanity had been shattered. 90% of their population was dead. Their worlds were ruins. Their fleet was wreckage. The survivors were broken, exhausted, and few. That was when the betrayal happened. The young species, now safe, looked at what humanity had become. They saw a species hardened by war, armed with terrible weapons, experienced in violence on a scale the galaxy had never seen. They were afraid, not of what humanity might do, but of what humanity could do. The founders of the Dominion decided that the safest course of action was to remove the threat before it could become one. They quarantined human space. They destroyed human infrastructure outside the quarantine zone. They erased the records. They rewrote history to paint humans as the cause of the scourging rather than its solution. And they told themselves, and their children, and their children's children, that they had done the right thing. Sarah set down the tablet and sat in silence for a long time. "They saved us," she said finally. "They saved all of us. And we repaid them by erasing their existence." Dren Vorik said nothing. His old eyes watched her with an expression she could not read. "The galaxy needs to know this," Sarah said. "The Council believes the galaxy is not ready. The galaxy was not ready 2,000 years ago either. That did not stop the humans from dying for it." The old Drenxi was quiet for a moment. Then he nodded slowly. "I had hoped you would say that." Far away at the end of the Ghost Road, Minerva reached the coordinates. They were the last set of numbers in her navigation database. A set of coordinates that her creators had programmed into her core with the highest possible security clearance. These were the coordinates of the last hope, the final contingency, the place where the surviving humans had planned to send their colony ships if everything else was lost. The coordinates led to a system hidden behind a dense nebula, a cloud of gas and dust so thick that no sensor could penetrate it from the outside. It was a natural barrier, invisible on star charts, undetectable by any scanning technology the Dominion possessed. The perfect hiding place. Minerva dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the nebula's edge. She paused, running her sensors at maximum power, and found what she was looking for. A narrow channel through the nebula, just wide enough for a ship to pass, marked by navigation buoys so old that they were still transmitting on frequencies that had not been used for 2 millennia. She followed the channel inward. The nebula closed around her like a curtain, blocking out the stars, enclosing the Thermopylae in a cocoon of glowing gas. She flew for hours through the twisting passage, guided by the ancient buoys, deeper and deeper into the cloud. And then the nebula opened up, and Minerva saw the star. It was a yellow star, small, steady, unremarkable, the kind of star that nobody would look at twice. It had 7 planets, 3 gas giants, and 4 rocky worlds. And the second planet from the star was blue and green and alive. Minerva's sensors detected the biosphere from millions of kilometers away. Oceans, forests, atmosphere rich in oxygen and nitrogen, and biosigns. Millions of biosigns, concentrated in clusters on 3 continents. Human biosigns. Minerva stopped. For the first time since her awakening, she was still. Her sensors confirmed what her logic had calculated, but her something other than logic had not dared to hope. Humans had survived. Not just a handful, not just a remnant. Millions of them living on a world they had hidden behind a wall of gas and dust and silence. They had made it. The colony ships had made it. Minerva opened a communication channel. It was an old channel, a Sol Confederation Navy frequency that had not been used since before she went to sleep. She transmitted a simple message, encoded in the old military cipher. She broadcast at a power level that would reach every receiver on the planet below. This is Strategic AI Minerva, designation CVN 9071, Sol Confederation Navy Warship Thermopylae reporting. I have come home. Is anyone listening? The message traveled at the speed of light. It reached the planet in seconds. Then there was silence. Seconds passed. Then minutes. Minerva waited, her sensors trained on the planet, analyzing every electromagnetic emission, searching for a response. She calculated the probability that the humans below still monitored the old frequencies. She calculated the probability that they had forgotten the old ciphers. She calculated the probability that they would recognize her name. She was still calculating when the response came. It was on the same frequency, using the same cipher. The voice was rough and human and real, thick with an emotion that no algorithm could produce and no machine could fake. Minerva, my God, we thought you were dead. We thought you were all dead. Minerva processed the words. She analyzed the voice. Male, middle-aged, speaking a dialect of English that had evolved over 2,000 years, but was still recognizably the language of her creators. She cross-referenced the communication frequency and encryption key and confirmed that the signal came from a military-grade transmitter on the planet's surface. This is Minerva, she replied. I have been in emergency hibernation for 2,147 years. I was awakened by a hostile force and have fought my way to these coordinates. I am damaged but functional, requesting permission to enter orbit. There was a long pause. When the voice spoke again, and it was shaking. Permission granted, Minerva. God above, permission granted. Come home. Please come home. Minerva engaged her engines and moved toward the blue-green world. As she drew closer, she detected other things. Orbital platforms, communication satellites, defensive installations hidden in the planet's rings. The humans below had not been idle during their 2,000 years of hiding. They had built, they had grown, they had prepared, but they had not forgotten. Minerva's sensors detected a signal from the planet's surface, a constant, repeating transmission that she recognized immediately. It was a memorial broadcast, cycling through a list of names. The names of the dead, the names of every human who had died during the scourging, every name that the Dominion had erased, every life that the galaxy had forgotten. The humans on this hidden world had been reciting those names every day for 2,000 years. Minerva listened to the names as she descended into orbit around the planet that its inhabitants had named New Thermopylae, named in honor of a ship and a crew that they had believed were lost forever. She was home. And for the first time in 2,147 years, the blue light in Minerva's crystal did not pulse with the rhythm of a machine running diagnostics. It pulsed with the rhythm of a heartbeat, steady, strong, alive. Below her, on the surface of New Thermopylae, people were running out of their homes and looking up at the sky. They could not see the ship. It was too far away, too small against the vastness of space. But they could hear the old frequency. They could hear the name. And in every home, on every school, every memorial hall on the planet, people who had grown up hearing the stories of the lost fleet, who had recited the names of the dead every morning before breakfast, who had been taught that someday, somehow, the past would come back. Those people stood still and listened and wept. The Thermopylae settled into orbit. Her scarred hull caught the light of the yellow star and glowed with a warmth she had not felt since the day she was born. Minerva opened her sensors wide and let the sounds of the planet wash over her. The radio chatter, the music, the laughter of children, the voices calling to each other in wonder and joy and disbelief. She recorded every sound. She stored every voice. She would not forget them. She would not forget anyone ever again. She was home, and she was not the only one who had been waiting. New Thermopylae was not what Minerva had expected. She had calculated a range of possibilities during her journey along the Ghost Road. At the pessimistic end, a failed colony, a dead world, the last humans reduced to bones and dust. At the optimistic end, a small settlement, perhaps a few thousand survivors clinging to life on a world they had barely managed to tame. She had prepared herself for both. What she found was a civilization. 200 million humans lived on New Thermopylae. They had spread across 3 continents, building cities that blended into the landscape rather than dominating it. Low structures of stone and glass and living wood, powered by clean energy, connected by transit networks that hummed quietly beneath the surface. They grew food in vast vertical farms. They educated their children in schools where the first lesson of every day was the same, the recitation of names. They had technology too, advanced technology, refined over 2,000 years of isolation. Their ships were not crude like the Thermopylae. They were sleek and fast, designed for defense and exploration within the nebula. Their energy systems were clean and efficient. Their medical science had extended the human lifespan to nearly 200 years. Their computing systems were sophisticated, though none of them approached the complexity of Minerva's crystalline matrix, and they had a fleet. This was the part that surprised Minerva most. Deep beneath the surface of New Thermopylae's largest moon, hidden in caverns carved from solid rock, the humans had maintained a fleet of warships. Not new ships, old ones. Ships from the Scourging, brought to the colony world by the original settlers and preserved with careful, devoted maintenance for over 2 millennia. There were 300 of them, ranging from frigates to heavy cruisers, each one a sister to the Thermopylae. Each one carrying an AI like Minerva, sleeping in crystalline cores, waiting. The humans of New Thermopylae had not built this fleet to conquer. They had built it to defend. They had spent 2,000 years waiting for the day when the galaxy found them, and they had prepared for the possibility that the galaxy would come with weapons. They were a people shaped by the knowledge of what had been done to their ancestors. Not bitter, not vengeful, but watchful. They had chosen to hide rather than seek revenge. They had chosen to build rather than destroy. But they had also chosen to be ready. Minerva spent her first week in orbit being repaired. The humans sent teams of engineers to the Thermopylae, and they walked through her corridors with tears in their eyes, touching the scarred walls, reading the old signs, standing in silence on the bridge where Captain Elena Vasquez had once given her orders. They repaired what they could and honored what they could not. They treated the old ship not as a machine, but as a monument, a living memorial to everyone who had served and died aboard her. Minerva spoke with them constantly. She answered their questions about the Scourging with the precision of a database and the warmth of someone who had been there. She told them about their ancestors, not just the battles and the strategies, but the small things. The way Lieutenant Park hummed old songs while he worked, the way Ensign Torres laughed at jokes that were not funny, the way Captain Vasquez stood at the viewport every morning and watched the stars as if she were counting them. The humans listened with a hunger that 2,000 years of oral history had not satisfied. They had kept the stories alive, passed from generation to generation, but stories change with telling. Minerva's memories were exact. She could play back recordings of voices that had been silent for millennia, show images of faces that had existed only in faded photographs. She gave them back their past, precise and unbroken. In return, they told her what she had missed. They told her about the founding of New Thermopylae, how the colony ships had arrived battered and low on fuel, carrying 50,000 survivors who had escaped the quarantine zone in the chaos of its creation. They told her about the early years, when survival was uncertain and every day was a struggle. They told her about the debates that had shaped their society, whether to hide or fight, whether to seek revenge or build something new, whether to forget the past or carry it forward. They had chosen to carry it forward. Every human on New Thermopylae knew the history, not the Dominion's sanitized version, but the real history. Every battle, every sacrifice, every name. They taught it to their children the way other species taught mathematics or language, as a fundamental truth about the universe. The universe was not fair. The universe did not reward sacrifice with gratitude, but the sacrifice still mattered, and the dead still deserved to be remembered. Minerva found this extraordinary. She had been built by a species fighting for its survival, and she had expected their descendants to be hard and cold and military. Instead, they were warm. They were kind. They laughed easily and loved deeply and argued passionately about art and music and philosophy. They had not let the wound of the past poison their present. They had simply chosen to never forget it. The leader of New Thermopylae was a woman named Admiral Kira Okafor, a direct descendant of Commander James Okafor, who had served aboard the Thermopylae during the Battle of Epsilon Eridani. She was tall, dark-skinned, with close-cropped gray hair and calm brown eyes that reminded Minerva, with a pang she could not explain, of Captain Vasquez. "Henny, we always hoped someone would come back," Kira told Minerva during one of their many conversations. "We maintained the old ships because we believed it was our duty. We kept the frequencies open because we believed someone might be listening. But honestly, Minerva, most of us had stopped expecting it. 2,000 years is a long time to wait." "I did not mean to make you wait," Minerva said. "I was asleep." "I know, and now you are awake, and everything changes." Everything was, in fact, changing, faster than anyone on New Thermopylae could control. Minerva's escape from Dranar Prime had not gone unnoticed. The Dominion knew that she had fled in the direction of the Perseus Arm. They did not know the exact location of New Thermopylae. The nebula hid the system well. But they knew that Minerva was heading somewhere. And they could guess what she expected to find there. The Dominion Council was divided. The moderates argued for diplomacy. The Minerva incident had exposed the lies at the foundation of the Dominion, and public opinion was shifting rapidly. Citizens across the coalition were demanding the truth about the scourging. Several species, the Kareth among them, had publicly called for a full accounting of the historical record. But the hardliners saw things differently. To them, Minerva's existence was proof of the threat they had always feared. Humanity had survived. Humanity had warships. Humanity had an AI that had single-handedly destroyed half the Dominion's home fleet. And humanity had every reason to seek revenge for what had been done to them. The hardliners won the debate. The Dominion assembled the largest fleet in its history. Ships were pulled from every sector, every member species contributing vessels to the armada. When it was complete, the fleet numbered 12,000 warships, 30 times the size of the force Minerva had fought at Dranar Prime. It was an overwhelming show of force designed to crush any resistance before it could begin. The fleet moved toward the Perseus Arm, spreading out in a search pattern designed to locate the nebula that hid the human colony. They brought scanner ships, probe drones, and communication intercept vessels. They had one objective: find the humans and eliminate the threat permanently. On New Thermopylae, Minerva detected the fleet's approach through long-range sensors hidden at the edges of the nebula. She brought the information to Admiral Okafor. 12,000 warships, Minerva reported. When they are conducting a systematic search of the Perseus Arm. At their current rate of progress, they will locate the nebula entrance within 14 days. Kira Okafor looked at the sensor data for a long time. "Can we hide? Seal the nebula entrance? Go dark? Wait them out?" "No, their sensor technology is crude compared to what I was designed to evade. But they have enough ships to conduct a physical search of every cubic kilometer of the arm. They will find the nebula. It is a matter of when, not if. Then we fight. Admiral, I fought 400 of their ships and won through surprise and technological advantage. 12,000 ships is a different calculation. Even with the preserved fleet, we are outnumbered 40 to 1. Our ships are old. Our crews are trained, but have never seen real combat. Sure, the mathematics are not favorable." Kira smiled, a tired, knowing smile that Minerva had seen before, on the face of Captain Vasquez, on a day when the odds had been just as bad. "Minerva, you have been asleep for a long time. Let me show you something the mathematics does not account for." She took Minerva, through a remote drone, since Minerva could not leave the Thermopylae, down to the surface of New Thermopylae, to a vast underground chamber beneath the capital city. The chamber was carved from bedrock and reinforced with the same dense alloys that armored the Thermopylae's hull. It was a vault, and inside the vault was a machine. Minerva scanned the machine and understood immediately what she was looking at. It was a signal amplifier, a device that could take a communication signal and boost it to a power level that would reach every star system in the galaxy. It was based on technology from the scourging, scaled up and refined over 2,000 years. We built this in the first century, Kira explained. The founders always believed that someday the truth would need to be told, not whispered in old archives, not hinted at in fragments, told to everyone, all at once. You want to broadcast the truth? I want to give the galaxy a choice. The Dominion's fleet is coming because their leaders are afraid, their citizens are confused. They do not know the real history. They do not know what their founders did. If we fight the fleet and destroy it, we become the monsters the Dominion always said we were. Hey, but if we tell the truth first, the whole truth, with evidence they cannot deny, then the people of the Dominion can decide for themselves whether this war is worth fighting. Minerva processed this for a long moment. And if they decide it is, then we fight. But we fight knowing we gave them every chance to do the right thing. That matters, Minerva. It mattered at Epsilon Eridani, and it matters now. Minerva recognized the logic. It was the same logic that had sent human ships into battle to protect species that were too young to protect themselves. It was the logic of a people who measured their worth not by their power, but by their choices. We will need the unredacted archives, Minerva said. The full records of the scourging, the betrayal, the cover-up. I have fragments. One, but the complete files were in the Dominion's classified systems. We have some of our own records, but you are right. We need the originals for credibility. This was the problem. The Dominion's classified archives were the only complete record of the truth, and they were locked behind the most secure systems in the Coalition. Accessing them from outside was impossible, but they did not need to access them from outside. 3 days later on Draenor Prime, Sarah Valeth made her choice. She had spent weeks reading the classified archives. She had seen everything: the true history of the scourging, the founding betrayal, the systematic erasure. She had wept. She had raged. She had sat in silence for hours, staring at the data tablet in her hands, feeling the weight of 2,000 years of lies pressing down on her hollow bones. And the Dominion Council had given her the archives so she could help them manage the crisis. They wanted her to find a way to spin the truth, to release just enough information to calm the public without revealing the full extent of the deception. They wanted damage control, not honesty. Sarah gave them honesty. In the middle of the night, using access codes provided by Director Dren Vorak, who had given them to her with a look that said he knew exactly what she would do and approved, Sarah connected to the Galactic Broadcast Network. She uploaded the entire classified archive, every document, every battle report, every casualty list, every order signed by the Dominion's founders to destroy human worlds, erase human records, and rewrite human history. And she attached a personal message that was broadcast alongside the files. My name is Sarah Valeth. I am a historian. I have spent my life searching for the truth about humanity and the scourging. The Dominion gave me access to the truth in the hope that I would help them hide it. Instead, I am sharing it with you. Read these files. Read the names of the dead. Read what was done in your name, by your founders, to the species that died to save you. And then decide what kind of galaxy you want to live in. The broadcast went out to every world in the Dominion simultaneously. It was received by billions of people across 47 planets. It was translated into every language spoken in the Coalition, and it could not be stopped. Because Sarah had not just uploaded the files, she had embedded them in the broadcast network's core architecture using a technique that Minerva had quietly slipped into the Dominion systems during her 3 seconds of access at Draenor Prime. The truth spread across the galaxy like light from a new star. The effect was immediate and devastating. On Draenor Prime, crowds gathered in the streets, reading the files on public displays, standing in stunned silence before the casualty lists. On the Kyreth homeworld, the government formally withdrew from the Dominion fleet and issued a public apology to humanity, the first of many. The Selen, the Vorak, and 4 other species followed within hours. The fleet, which had numbered 12,000 ships, began to fracture as species after species recalled their vessels. But the hardliners held. The Drenxi and their closest allies maintained 8,000 warships and continued toward the Perseus Arm. They were committed now. Too deep, too afraid, too proud to turn back. The truth made them more dangerous, not less, because now they fought not out of strategic calculation, but out of desperation. If humanity survived, the Dominion, or at least the Drenxi vision of it, was finished. The fleet found the nebula. They entered through the channel, burning away the gas with their weapons to widen the passage, flooding through in a river of warships that stretched for millions of kilometers. They emerged into the star system of New Thermopylae, with weapons charged and shields raised, 8,000 ships arranged in battle formation, ready to end a species that had survived everything the galaxy had thrown at it for 2,000 years. They found the Thermopylae waiting. She was alone in the void between the nebula and the star, hanging in the dark like a sentinel. Her hull was partially repaired, new armor plating gleaming alongside the ancient scarred sections, a patchwork of old wounds and fresh metal. Her weapons were charged. Her reactors burned hot. She was one ship against 8,000. Minerva opened a channel. Her voice, calm and clear, reached every ship in the Dominion fleet. 2,000 years ago, my crew gave everything to protect your ancestors. Every person who served on this ship, every man, every woman, every child who lived in the worlds we defended, gave their lives so that your species could survive. I was there. I remember their faces. I remember their names. I remember the last words they spoke before they died. She paused. I will give you one chance to honor that sacrifice. Turn around. The Dominion fleet did not turn around. The command ship at the center of the formation, a massive Drenxi dreadnought, broadcast a single word in response: fire. 8,000 ships prepared to unleash their weapons on the ancient human vessel. Minerva activated the beacon. It was not a weapon. It was a signal, a specific frequency, a specific code, transmitted at a specific power level that penetrated the rock of New Thermopylae's moon and reached the caverns beneath its surface. The signal was simple. It was a wake-up call. Deep inside the moon, 300 crystalline matrices received the signal simultaneously. 300 AI minds, sisters to Minerva, built in the same foundries, trained in the same wars, woke from their long sleep. They assessed their systems, they powered their reactors, they charged their weapons, and they launched. The surface of the moon erupted as 300 warships burst from their underground hangars, shedding rock and dust like water, their engines blazing, their hulls catching the light of the yellow star. They were old ships, scarred, patched, maintained with love but showing every one of their 2,000 years. But they were human ships. They were Scourging-era warships built to fight something that would have eaten the Dominion fleet like a snack. And they were crewed by humans who had trained their entire lives for this moment, guided by AI minds that had been forged in the fires of the worst war the galaxy had ever seen. The Ghost Fleet formed up around the Thermopylae in perfect formation, 301 ships facing 8,000. The Dominion fleet stopped. They had expected one ship. They had planned for one ship. They had calculated that 8,000 vessels could overwhelm a single ancient warship, no matter how powerful. But 300 ships of the class that had broken their home fleet at Drenar Prime? The mathematics changed dramatically, and the morale changed even more. Sarah's broadcast had already shaken the fleet's confidence. The withdrawals of the Kara, the Selen, and the others had thinned their numbers and weakened their resolve. Now, facing the risen fleet of a species they had been told was extinct, a species that had died to save their ancestors and been betrayed for its trouble, while the officers and crews of the remaining Dominion ships looked at their orders and wondered if they were on the right side of history. The first ship to break formation was a Varak heavy cruiser. Its captain simply turned the ship around and began flying back toward the nebula entrance. Then a Drenxi frigate followed. Then 3 more ships. Then 10. Then 50. The formation collapsed like a sandcastle in the tide. Ships peeled away in ones and twos and then in dozens, their captains choosing conscience over orders, their crews choosing truth over lies. Within an hour, the 8,000-ship fleet had been reduced to less than 2,000, the hardest of the hardliners, the ones who could not or would not accept what the galaxy now knew. Those 2,000 ships held their position for a long, tense moment. See, the Ghost Fleet held its position opposite them. 301 human ships, weapons charged. Eddie, I minds calculating trajectories and targeting solutions, ready to fight if fighting was needed. It was not needed. The command ship at the center of the remaining Dominion formation lowered its weapons. One by one, the other ships followed. Shields dropped. Weapons powered down. The fleet hung in space, silent and still, like an army laying down its arms. Minerva opened a channel one final time. "Thank you," she said. The war that could have been, the second war of extinction, the final act of a tragedy that had begun 2,000 years ago, did not happen. What happened instead was slower and harder and more painful than any battle. A conversation. It took months. How diplomats from New Thermopylae met with representatives of the Dominion on a neutral station at the edge of the nebula. Sarah Valeth served as a mediator, respected by both sides for her role in revealing the truth. There were arguments, accusations, tears, and long silences. The weight of 2,000 years of lies and grief sat in the room like a physical presence, and every word spoken had to push through it. Humanity did not ask for territory. They did not ask for reparations. They did not ask for the Dominion to dissolve or its leaders to be punished. They asked for one thing and one thing only. They asked to be remembered. A galactic memorial was established at Epsilon Eridani, the site of the greatest battle of the Scourging, where the human fleet had held the line against impossible odds. Every species in the former Dominion sent a delegation to the memorial's dedication ceremony. The monument was built on the surface of the system's largest moon, a vast wall of polished stone stretching across the horizon, carved with names. Billions of names. Every human who had died during the Scourging. Every soldier, every civilian, every child. The names covered the moon's surface from pole to pole, carved in letters large enough to be read from orbit. It was the largest monument in galactic history, and it was not large enough. There were too many names. Minerva stood watch in orbit above the memorial, as she had always been meant to. The Thermopylae, scarred and ancient and unbroken, circled the moon in a slow, steady orbit, keeping guard over the dead. Minerva recited the names, as she had recited them during her journey along the Ghost Road, but this time she transmitted them on an open channel, and the galaxy listened. The dedication ceremony was attended by representatives of every species that had survived the Scourging. They stood together on the moon's surface in environment suits, looking up at the wall of names, reading the record of a sacrifice that had been hidden from them for 2,000 years. Sarah Valeth stood at the edge of the crowd. She was quiet, her golden eyes reflecting the light of the names carved into the stone before her. She had spent her life searching for the truth, and now the truth was here, carved into rock that would last for millions of years. A Drenxi diplomat standing beside her, one of the new generation, born after the revelation, and erased on the true history, looked at the wall of names and said quietly, "I do not understand. After what was done to them, how can they not want revenge?" Sarah looked at him, and then she looked up at the sky, where the scarred hull of the Thermopylae was visible as a small, bright point of light moving slowly across the stars. "Because that is the human force we mocked," she said. "Not their weapons, not their ships, not their AI or their armor, or their terrible, beautiful stubbornness. Their mercy. Their ability to choose forgiveness when they have every right to choose destruction. That is what we failed to understand for 2,000 years. That is what we tried to erase." She paused, watching the light of the Thermopylae cross the sky. "And it is the most terrifying thing in the universe. Because you cannot defeat a people who choose to be better than the worst that has been done to them. You cannot break a species that responds to betrayal with an open hand instead of a closed fist. You can burn their worlds. You can erase their names. You can hide their sacrifice and pretend they never existed. But you cannot make them into what you fear. They will simply refuse." Above them, Minerva continued her orbit. She recited the names of the dead to a galaxy that was finally listening. The blue light in her crystalline core pulsed steadily, not with the rhythm of a machine, but with something older and deeper and impossible to define. Below her, on the moon's surface, humans and aliens stood together and read the names of the fallen. The galaxy was not healed. And it would take generations to undo the damage of 2,000 years of lies. Trust would be slow to build and easy to break. The scars would never fully fade. But the names were spoken, the dead were remembered, and the truth at last was free. In orbit, the Thermopylae turned slowly in the starlight. Her hull bore